So today we're going to be talking about the practice of Dharma trips as one of the practices that you do with your students. And I was thinking before we get into talking about how you use travel as teachers, could you speak a little about your early experiences with travel, either before you met the Dharma or as a student?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great inquiry. Why don't you start,
All right.
Capel?
Well, I was one of the few students of our teacher, Namgyal Rinpoche, who had traveled a fair bit before they met the teacher. Most of his students had started traveling with him, so he took people traveling. But I had already gone around the world once, halfway around the world, once on my own in my 20s before I met Namgyal. So for me, the traveling part was already in place. And then, of course, he taught by leading retreats and doing courses and by having people travel to various places to do retreats and courses. And then also for some people who would travel with him in smaller numbers to various places. So traveling was a big part of the teaching, traveling in retreats, I suppose. And then the interpersonal relationship you had with your teacher under those conditions. So that's sort of how I walked into it. How about
Because
you?
you would travel to a place and then hold a retreat in that
Right.
location,
Yeah, that's right. He would
And-
teach in Italy or Greece or Australia.
and sometimes live there for quite some time,
And sometimes,
right? Like
yeah.
a year at a time.
Yeah,
or so.
yeah. He lived in Greece for 2 or 3 years on and off, and I think same thing in Italy.
Yeah, so like Capel, I also traveled quite extensively from when as soon as I could from as a young person before I met Capel in this teaching, and that has been such an important part of my journey. I feel like it really does take a lot to kind of deconstruct or loosen our conditioning that we're raised with. And like you, Chris, I've lived in a number of countries, which then takes it to another level. It's really quite amazing how deep our familial and national conditioning is. And so extensive travel and living in other countries really helps us to be more people of the planet, people of the world, more able to communicate with people from different cultures and different backgrounds and different languages and so on. And for me, that's just been such a beautiful and important part of my life. And then conjoined with the teachings, conjoined with the spiritual practice, then it really becomes such a powerful part of our path.
Yeah, traveling is such an education, as Sensei says, and it's an education you cannot get anywhere else. It's
Yeah,
unique
there's
to
really
itself.
no other way to. It's a very unique kind of learning.
Yeah.
I think that nothing else can replace.
And again, Sensei lived in Japan for 20 years. I lived in Greece for a couple of years, and then Japan for 10 years. And living in a foreign culture, foreign country, but foreign culture even more, is really a change in perspective that you can't get any other way than doing it. As you know, having lived in China for what, 10 years?
Yeah, I lived in China and in Central America. Yeah, which is a great segue because what that brings up for me is that was an important part of my upbringing. It was always if we had money, we traveled. It was explicitly said to me, you always travel when you can afford it, and because it's so important. And the people that I met abroad, and so there's I think for a lot of people an intuitive understanding of how it grows us as people and yet we're talking about Dharma trips. And can you say a little bit about what Dharma trips actually are? Because I don't think it's not just tourism with your sangha, right?
Correct.
As a human being, you got to decide like what's the most important thing. So that's called the spiritual line of development in integral theory. And so, what is the most important thing for a human being? And from our perspective, growth and unfoldment. You can say it in many different ways, but growth and unfoldment is the purpose of being a human. And there are two ways basically to do that. One is through developing better states of being, being in a good state, and the other is by working through various levels of conditioning and programming that are either in your culture or your religion or whatever, and hold you in kind of a box that doesn't really work, either because it's old or because values have changed, the world's changed. And so that's a stage change. So the beauty about travel is it is really about stage change in its start, in its get-go. But in order to be able to manage those stage changes in traveling, you need to be able to manage your state.
That's right.
Another aspect of it is that a Dharma trip isn't the same thing as a tourist trip, in the sense that when you go on a tourist trip, you probably go with friends and family. They're people who you've chosen to be with on the basis of your current programming and current values and current understanding. Similarities. But Dharma, once you get into a spiritual life, in a sense, you get a different demographic. The demographic in a spiritual life isn't necessarily people who would be your best friends or even good friends in the other world. You're finding you're meeting people who are, in fact, have the same aspiration as you, which is to grow and develop and unfold, but they may not be people that you would choose to be your friends from the condition point of view, from the previous stage, actually. So then what happens is you're on the road with your teachers, guides, mentors, and with 10, 20, 30 other people, not all of whom you'd ever choose to be friends, and you're in close quarters, day in, day out, for however long, anywhere from 2 weeks to a month, sharing accommodations, sharing bus rides, sharing meals, and you're interfacing with these people all day, every day, without a break. You can't go home to your room. You can't go home to your TV. You can't go home to your inner sanctum because you're on the road moving. And so it's a huge stage provoker, and it's a huge state stimulator.
It might sound like a form of torture, the way that Cavell has described it, and it has moments, I'm sure, of feeling that way. And it's just the best for helping us break through our current limitations, because like Cavell's describing, there's no place to escape to allow our ego to rebuild. So whatever arisings come up, we just need to face them and work through them, because there's essentially no other option. It's outstanding. And really, Dharma trips are just about the only time that we can create those circumstances. Retreat is one too, but it depends, if it's a solitary retreat or like a retreat at Clear Sky, the land is so spacious that people can go off on their own, and they might work through it and they might not. Hopefully they're working through it. That's what we try to set up the conditions to do. But on a Dharma trip, it's really a crucible where all the issues get distilled, get very intense, and then we just work through them as individuals and also as a group, which is really cool.
Yeah. There's just no way that you can kind of do it justice without having done it, because every lesson, like maybe it's meals, like you're eating food that you wouldn't choose, or you're in a place where, like in Bhutan or like a Dak or someplace where it's just not going to be what you're after, and you just can't go off on your own and go eat somewhere else, right? Because you're with a group. So there's these compromises, in your room and your situation, and then you're traveling. It's all sorts of stuff is coming up all the time that just messes with your happy habit paradigm in, say, Calgary, where you have your routine and it's the same. It doesn't change much. And then when you do have a little interruption in your routine in Calgary, you get a bit bugged, because it's messing with your habit. And coming back to the teaching aspect of it, you're in situations where if you're having a conflict or you're having a struggle or you're having difficulty, you've got to process it in community. So none of us really have community. I mean, we're almost all living in some version of a nuclear family. Excuse me. So in a sense, we live in a small group of people who we've already made terms with that we're going to live with those people. But in a community, you're living with a broader range of people who have various positions and values and feelings about things. And so you can't just turn around and go away from these people. You got to travel with them on a bus for 10 hours or on a boat somewhere. And so you have to really learn what it is, in partly to live in a community on the road. So there's two kinds of communities, of course. There's the community that's on the road. That's what we're talking about. And then there's the community on the ground. Well, hardly anybody, as I said, has a community on the ground in the sense of more than 4 or 5 people who are his family. Except, like at Clear Sky here, we have a community of 12, 15 people. So that's one way. And the other is traveling, but traveling in some ways is harder because there's no, as we said earlier, there's no place where you can kind of run to your room and close your door.
Yeah.
And then who you share a room with. So sometimes we assign who goes in which room with who. Partly when somebody needs a break, and partly when somebody doesn't need a break, needs to be stimulated a bit. So this is all part of the journey.
It feels like what you're describing is that even for those of us who feel like travel has been a very important part of our growth and so on, it really feels like you're describing a way that most of us are just scratching the surface of the potential, and that you're really working to leverage every possible angle of the context of travel.
Yeah, ideally, and it comes in unexpected ways.
You're stretching externally in your environment. You're stretching internally in your human relationships, and then you're stretching also, like in if you're listening and paying attention, in terms of your views and concepts and understandings of what normal is. Because if you're in Canada and you never leave Canada, or only on to a resort or something, or
the U.S. and never leave the U.S.
something like that,
or another country.
Yeah, you're not really been kind of opened in a way. And when you go travel versus being tourist, you go travel in a country, which is you're there to experience the people on the land, not just have your experience with some friends. There are some really profound openings just that you meet from people who are kind of different. We talked earlier about habit, and we don't interfere with our habits unless we really have to. and even then we probably don't do a very good job of it. And some of the habits are okay, and some of them are probably debilitating. But again, a student will get in a situation where they get into a confrontation or a struggle with either a fellow student or with a local, and the way the community comes in to sort of de-armor that and deprogram the confrontation aspect of it is really quite brilliant, because it's just that sense of having a relationship with who you're talking to that isn't just you, the tourist, and them, the local. And so people get much more skillful at communicating, and they don't even know they're doing it sometimes, which is kind of fascinating. It takes us back to where we started, which is that traveling is a huge transformation for people if they do it in a community or a group, and they do it as a spiritual exploration, and they do it with Sangha community and teachers who are going on this Dharma trip principally as a spiritual adventure, and secondarily as a kind of visit to a strange land adventure.
Yeah, I was wondering whether as people start to travel again and resume exploring new places, is there something that Dharma trips offer to our current context that, or coming up in, if you see in the near future, that's new or different? Or is this just simply a timeless practice that if you're doing it with skilled guides and a strong Sangha is going to just always reveal something?
I think the younger generation, millennials, Z, they're super concerned with safety and security, I think, and traveling is getting more difficult, more expensive, and less rare. Less rare in the sense that everybody's been everywhere. But what people tend not to choose is kind of the off-road, somewhere else, not the familiar route traveling. And also the younger people have been, I think, because of their devices and things, they tend to spend more time texting with each other. So I think by getting people, younger people on the road, traveling, moving around, the texting goes down, other than for communication, and the interaction with people again that you have to do when you're traveling on the road as a group would be strengthened. So I think that'd be really good for millennials and Zs, but it is more expensive, and so we're planning my 75th birthday is in a couple of years, and we're planning a trip to what we call the Stan, so Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, basically to go to Samarkand and Tashkent and Bukhara and these places that are on the Silk Route. And that would be a kind of a rougher trip, and probably also a kind of not a trip that most people would choose as what they want to do on their Christmas holiday. So again, it's that sense of going somewhere beyond just, oh, I need a holiday, I'm going to go to Hawaii. I need a Dharma trip, I'm going to the Stan. So
Yeah, really looking forward to this one.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and shedding some light on this practice. I think it's really a wonderful way for people to realize how much more there is out there to explore. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Well, see you soon, I hope.
See you on a Dharma trip, I hope.